Hello, I'm Mike. You might know me from such places as You Probably Don't Know Me. I do not do this YouTube thing ever. I did some very old music stuff, which is maybe where you might know me, where I have like a handful of subscribers and they're probably really confused as to what I'm doing with my life these days. I have some probably 10-year-old plus guitar performances that I did on a really crappy digital camera with terrible audio, but for some reason those became kind of popular. I can do better, and hopefully I will in the future, but that's not what this is about. I will put some links down below to some stuff so you can kind of know what I'm on about. This particular video I'm making because people don't read anything. And I recently did a project that I wrote a lot of stuff about and did a lot of sort of chronicling with video and pictures and stuff. And I uploaded all that. Really, the end goal was to raise awareness for a few organizations that I feel like are doing really good work right now in this time of weirdness and crisis and the government in action. And, you know, I know it's a lot to ask people to pay attention to yet another thing that they need to pay attention to right now. I totally get that. But if you have the time, you know, it would be great if you could take a look at the original post, which again, I'll link to down below, and just have a look. The project that I'm referring to was an attempt that I planned for a little while. I had some help from just a couple of people, but it was entirely self-supported. And on a local mountain bike trail here, I did 67 laps of a 1.4 mile loop, which is, you know, less a feat of like athletic brilliance and more like probably an attempt at working out some mental illness issues. But I did manage to do it, and I wasn't sure going into it if I could do it. I did a bunch of calculations just based on pace and what I would need to do over, you know, an amount of time. And I wrote all about this in a Q&A session, just about all the logistics and everything. But it was looking like it was probably going to be a 10 to 15 hour day. And it was somewhere in there. It was a little over 13 hours. And it came out to about 93 miles round trip. Long day. But it was cool. It was cool to have it, you know, come to fruition. What I wanted to do here is just bore you just a little more about this thing, and do it in a format that's a little more consumable than all the text that I posted. And you know, 13 and a half hours is a long time for anything. I don't think I've ever done anything for 13 and a half hours before this thing. But, you know, in 13 and a half hours, like a lot of stuff happens. And there actually were a few things that happened that I didn't mention anywhere else. So I'd like to add some addenda to this project. Addenda is a Latin word meaning more things you don't care about. And so there's like 9 points. So I'm gonna start now. Thing the first. On this loop, it was basically a climb up to a turnaround point and then back down a flow trail. And the climb is an old snowmobile trail. And it's actually gotten a lot better over the years. We used to ride it a lot just purely as a downhill trail when the flow trail that's parallel to it didn't exist. And it got pretty rutted out, and it was like not super fun, but it was very fast. And there was like there's little curvy thing at the bottom that you can kind of rock it around. And almost nobody descends it anymore because it's become the up track to get up to the flow trail and come back down. But I went up and down this thing 67 times that day. I've done it a lot more than that. Inevitably, like, you see a few people. And toward the end of the day, it was probably into, hour 11 or 12, this group of like 4 tween kids, boys, had ridden up. And I rode up past them. They were kind of waiting at the top. I don't know exactly what they were doing. Maybe waiting for a friend to show up so they could ride together or something. But they were just kind of hanging out at the top. And I had done several laps where I'd come up, I'd gone past them up to my turnaround point, because there's a kind of little launch section where you can stop and then turn around and get into the flow trail. But I was going up a little higher. I was trying to go up as high as I could on my loop so I could get the maximum vertical ascent every lap, because I'm smart that way. But anyway, I was coming by these guys a bunch of times, and I'm a dad, and I have an 11-year-old daughter, and it's starting to become an age where, like, it's a little hard to make jokes. Like, everything is a dad joke, even like the best jokes are dad jokes. So I thought, dad joke would be, why not beat myself up even more than I already have after 11 or 12 hours. So as I was coming up, I passed them for the 4th time or something, and I just said, "Oh, guys, I'm really sorry to keep coming by. It's just that I'm lost." And I said it a little more dryly than that. And I was expecting, 11, 12, 14-year-old me would have said something just jerky or whatever, and that's what I was expecting. But defying all stereotypes, one of the kids just immediately responded, "Oh, do you need directions?" And that was hilarious. He actually won that joke off, like, in a big way. But he was totally being serious and helpful. Number 2, I came down this flow trail 67 times. So there was a lot of opportunity for a lot of things to happen. The number one thing I was trying to avoid is crashing, which I did manage to do by essentially just not going too fast and just not actually pedaling much at all on the way down and just trying to recover. But toward the bottom of the loop, it opens up into a hayfield, and there's a little last jump at the end. And I noticed it was getting a little humid and hot, so I had unzipped my jersey, I don't know, like midsection-ish, just to get a little more ventilation. And I noticed on this one lap that some sort of flying insect had hit me kind of in the abdomen. And I just assumed in the moment, like, it hit me and bounced off. But as I got further down to my turnaround point at the bottom, I started feeling some agitation and pain. And I realized as I made the turn and I started to come back up that whatever had hit me was actually inside my jersey. And it was mad, like really not happy. And I felt this succession of like 4 or 5 stings and realized there was something in there. And I unzipped and I only saw it just for a second. I'm going to blame it on a baby yellow jacket because I hate them. They're the worst stinging insect on the planet. If you don't have them where you are, good for you. You can Google it. They're useless. But it was pretty small. It could have been one of its like insect stinging friends, but that's what I'm going with. It stung me 5 times. I had welts for days and days and days. I still probably do. I'm not going to show you because family show. Number 3. I did actually mention this elsewhere. I can't remember which one of the posts, but I did see a weasel. which was like the coolest thing that happened that day. I had a little aid station set up at the bottom of the turnaround, where I kept my food and stuff. And I drank a lot of water that day, because I did not want to fail on this thing due to dehydration. But I kind of overreached a little bit on intake. So I was taking a lot of potty breaks. And if you follow the GPS track, you can find them. They're pretty obvious. A lot of stopping. I'm 50. It happens. As I was taking one of these breaks, I just happened to look up, and there was this baby weasel. And it was just it had its head kind of down, and it was just kind of walking toward me. And it was a little alarming because the only weasel thing I know of is Weasels Rip My Flesh, the Frank Zappa album cover. And I didn't want that to happen, especially as I was, sort of taking a break, if you know what I mean. So I just said, hey, weasel. And the weasel looked up, and it just kind of like looked down again and went off to the side, and everything was cool. I was afraid it was going to try to take my food after I realized it wasn't going to attack me necessarily. I had more laps to do it. I guess it could have come back. Number 4. I had planned on a 15-hour day. I hoped to do less than that. But I also knew that, or at least I had it in my head that like 15 hours was going to be the cutoff. Like if I was having a really hard time, I just wasn't gonna keep going after that. I mean, I probably would have, if I'd been close, but that was just what I had in mind. That's what I planned for. That's how many bottles I had pre-filled, so I didn't have to mess with any of that. But what that meant, just in terms of, I wanted to do the majority of this thing in daylight, or as much of it as I could. And I really didn't want to finish in the dark. That psychologically is just, it's just not great. But I'm pretty comfortable when I have to, like, starting early. So I got up really early. I got up at 2 a.m. With a 3 a.m. departure. And I wanted to get started by 4. So that really only left me like an hour in the dark, theoretically. The night before, I had a pretty big meal, because I did not want to get up at 2 a.m. and try to choke down a bunch of food. That just digestively does not work for me. I cannot get food down that early. So I had a pretty big meal. So I had quite a bit of stuff in my body as I woke up, which was the plan. And then I only had, I think I had a fruit smoothie, and I had a cup of coffee. And I had made enough coffee to put in a thermos to bring to have at the aid station, just in case I was feeling sleepy, and needed a little pick-me-up. But, if you don't know what peristalsis is, it's a real thing, and it works really well, for me at least. And this is probably too much information, but whatever. Everybody poops. You do. I do. If you don't, it's just something you probably want to see a doctor about. It's really important. And to be blunt, like, constipation is like not a good thing. And it in particular can really affect your performance on a bike. If, especially given you're sitting sort of like this, kind of hunched over the whole time. And so I was kind of hoping things would work themselves out, but I also didn't want to consume so much coffee that it would become an emergency at 3 a.m. or something like that, or 4 a.m. or 7 a.m. while I'm on the bike, right? But as things worked out, I'm generally a pretty regular person, with the aid of coffee, and it just didn't happen. And I think it probably wasn't enough coffee to make things happen. And that was okay. But what I really didn't want is just like discomfort. and I felt some. And this is, by the way, the thing that on one of the two things that I wrote about this. This is the thing I was going to tell you about. So, uh, what happened was I started feeling a little bit of a build, like this thing, this thing might work its way out during this thing, and that was fine. That was fine. Like I can go in the woods; it's not a big deal. And I had prepared for this. I brought a little toilet paper roll that was just like just a little bit of toilet paper, and I had a plastic bag, and I had no problem. If things happened the way they were going to happen, I had no problem bagging it and carrying it out, and not a big deal. You know, it's fine. So as I felt this sort of build over a series of laps, about midway through the day, I became a little concerned that this might build like, a problem. So I started writing with a toilet paper roll and the plastic bag in my jersey. And, an already long story longer, it never happened. And I finished with these things in my jersey after 13 and a half hours. And that was the one thing that kind of didn't go to plan and was not great. Number 5. I saw a few people I knew during this attempt. The trail that I rode is very, very popular in the area, and it's kind of a nexus of a bunch of different trails. You either come through there on another trail, or you start there and kind of go from there. So I saw people in the trailhead. I saw a couple of friends on the trail, and one is a good friend, Mike, and his kid were riding, and they wanted to talk, and I didn't have it in me to talk, and I apologized, and I caught up with Mike later and explained it, what was going on. He wanted to know if it was like a last man standing kind of thing, and it kind of was, just a field of one. And then another friend of mine, David, caught me on one of my laps, and we rode it together. He let me go in front of him. We never actually talked about it, but he followed me down, and then he went off and did another loop, and I was expecting him to come down and we'd have a little chat at my aid station or whatever, but he didn't. But then I saw him again as I was coming up, and he was coming down, and he he almost got in my face. He was like, "What are you doing? Tell me what you're doing." I just briefly said, like, I'm trying to do 12,000 vertical today. And he kind of joked that he was trying to do 1,200 vertical that day, and haha. But it was funny. David is a very analytical person, and he immediately wanted to talk about why I wasn't using another segment or joining the segment I was doing with another segment. And this whole entire conversation was happening, within about 10 seconds. And I had zero brain juice to have it. I think it was like hour 10 or 11 at that point. And I just told David that I would fill him in on why I made the decisions I made later, which I eventually did in the Q&A that I wrote. Number 6. I have a pretty cool bike, I think, for me anyway. It's a Scott Spark 710. It's a 27.5 bike. I'm not a tall person, and 27.5 works really well for me. Sue me, like I don't, if you ride 29er and you're a small person, that's great. I don't care. I like my bike. Good for you though. But it has a twin lockout system, so you can lock out the front fork and the front fork. Like there's another fork. You can lock out the front suspension and the rear suspension at the same time with one trigger, which is really useful. The catch is that I replaced the fork with a Fox Stepcast 34 that when I ordered it, I thought it was a remote, but it isn't. And it got installed, and that was fine. It was my screw up, but I've never I have the part, but I've never done the fork teardown to put the lockout, the push pull lockout in and everything, which I have to do now. But I didn't have that working that day, so I made the decision because I knew I was going to be turning around a billion times, that I would just ride it with the fork fully open, because I knew at some point I would forget to lock it out or unlock it or whatever. And over the course of a day, that's just too much to think about. I did lock out the rear suspension every time I climbed up. And it's a fairly rough climb kind of toward the top. So having the suspension open in the front is really not a big deal. I don't feel like I lost, energy doing that. But I did manage to do the first hour in the dark, completely locked out. And the whole time I was thinking because I just forgot to unlock. It was dark and I didn't look down and I just didn't think about it. And I had everything locked out from a previous ride. Just like I did a little bit of road riding at the end of my ride and left it all locked out. And it's dark. It was foggy when I first started. So even my headlamp, stuff, I couldn't really see very well. And I was riding really tentatively, and I was getting this feedback from my bike that was like, don't do anything wrong, because it was all locked out. And I figured that out once the sun came up. But that was kind of silly. Number 7 and 8, I'm going to put these together. I rode with a headlamp and a bike light. I've actually never used them previous to this thing. So that's the one thing that I hadn't really tested out. And what I didn't realize was how short the battery life is on those things. The headlamp was okay, I think, though it after an hour was starting to go down. But the bar mounted one, I ran at full power, and within an hour it was orange glowing and telling me imminent not good things. Had I known that, I would have just run it from a backup battery, which I had. I had a little top tube pack with a couple of backup batteries that I had in my mind reserved for my phone and my Garmin. The Garmin, by the way, never needed it. I have a Garmin Edge 530 that I got prior to this thing, as an upgrade to my 810, which is probably 4 years old or so. The battery on that one is just, I knew it wasn't going to last longer than 4 hours without a charge, and I just did not want to. I was terrified of doing this whole thing and losing data on it. And, even though it would have happened up here, just not being able to have something to show for it in terms of data, would have sucked. So I upgraded this 530 because the battery life was supposed to be better. And boy, was it ever. It was, I did 13 and a half hours and it was still at 70% charge. And I use somewhat conservative consumption. I don't run the backlight. I have a lot of the alerty stuff turned off, but nothing crazy. And to have 70% left, it's a new battery, but that is just, that is incredible. I wasn't clear-headed enough at the time to realize that I could have just run that bar light off of a battery for an hour, and not seen that light come on. But it was no big deal. After an hour, the sun came up and I didn't need it anymore. The other thing is I didn't realize this at the time because I hadn't really used it. But the people in my family, by that I mean myself and my daughter in particular, we hear high-pitched frequencies very, very clearly, and they drive us nuts. Back in the day, I'm going to date myself here, but CRT tube monitors and stuff, I can hear that hum off of those things. Earlier LED lights drive me nuts. I can't have them in my house because I can hear it. And my daughter right now is actually going through what we thought was tinnitus, but is actually, she can just hear these frequencies and it drives her nuts. It's kind of a great thing in some ways, doing music and stuff, being able to hear those things can help with mixing and mastering and that sort of thing, but it's also just a plague, um, just in terms of you hear it all the time. Like you need like earplugs, right? And what I didn't realize is that the one that I run on my helmet actually emits a sound that is horrible. Um, and I can hear it. Probably most people wouldn't, but I do. And I was glad when I was able to turn that thing off. And the last one, this is 9-ish. What I did was, again, like not the most amazing feat. It wasn't an Everesting thing. I did not do 30,000 feet, 29,029 feet, actually. Um, I did 12,000 vertical, which is the vertical relief of Everest. Everest is at like 17 and change. The top is 29. So it's roughly 12,000 feet would be how much you would actually climb if you climbed Everest from the base there. Um, so that, I mean, that was kind of relatable, and that's kind of what I came at it from, like just as a goal. To do 30,000 feet on my sort of little lap loop would have meant like 170 laps or 35 to 45 hours, which is stupid, way stupider than what I did. I don't recommend it. If you want to try it, that is your call. But I think it's one of the reasons why there are fewer mountain bikers attempting these things. I wrote about Payson McAlvin's when he did it on a Colorado trail at altitude. It's personally, I think it's like the coolest and the way hardest version of this Everesting thing that I've seen. To do that on single track is a completely different challenge than going up and down a road, which is really hard. I get it. Like being able to put out that kind of pro caliber watts over 8 hours or whatever it is, whatever, 7.5 or whatever Contador did recently, is super impressive, but way harder off-road. It just is. And so I was going for, more of a challenge, right? But to do that, I had to plan kind of the crap out of it. I had to do some testing to see how many laps I could do in an hour and do a bunch of math. And then I made an itinerary for eating and drinking, and I stuck to that. And then I was, because I was self-supported, I was trying to check in with my wife. So, she didn't think I was dead. And, it was kind of a lot. It was a lot of planning and stuff. And as a result, when I actually hit the 12,000 feet, I was I was already done. I was like emotionally, I just wanted to be done. The after work crowd was starting to show up, and that's great. After work crowd is like what mountain biking and really cycling is about, right? But I did not want to get in anybody's way or vice versa. And that was starting to happen just a tiny little bit. I just wanted to get out of there. And so, when I topped out on that last lap, I didn't feel any sense of joy or anything. It's kind of on brand for me. I immediately had placed myself back at the aid station where I was getting my disgusting clothing off, changing, drinking a recovery drink, and packing everything up and just getting out. And I was already in the shower, but when I hit it, and that's kind of a little bit of the curse of doing things that required this much planning. I mean, I could have winged it. I could have just decided one day to just get up and do it. But I think I would have absolutely failed, because what it really would have taken to complete something like this, it would have felt, if you're not preparing for a 13-hour day and you end up doing a 13-hour day, it's way different. Psychologically, it's really difficult. But on the other hand, spontaneity is kind of where it's at for a lot of people, and myself included. I don't like planning everything like that. So the next thing that I do is definitely going to be more spontaneous, probably. Okay, so this isn't 13 and a half hours long. I'm going to wrap it up. Please do check out the links. If you like this, it'd be great if you liked it, with the thing. And if you want to subscribe, that's great. If you don't, we'll all live. I know there's a lot of content out there these days. I may do more of this kind of stuff. So if you found it at all entertaining or interesting, there may be more. All right. Thank you.